What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Champions League group stage over. MLS Cup set. I am here to talk about all of it tonight. Before I jump in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss upcoming episodes of the Touchline Talk Show, as well as the rest of the content I put out every single week. Okay. Starting with the Champions League, that's the primary idea behind putting this show on Wednesdays. So that's where we begin. And I was planning to focus more on the two groups that have been the most interesting in the Champions League and had the most going on this final match day, except we need to talk about something else first. And that other thing is what Benfica did to somehow top Group H ahead of PSG. To put this into context, so PSG and Benfica had been basically as close as you can be the entire way through this. No goals, two draws, same amount of goals scored then, obviously. Same scoreline, so there was nothing separating them in the head-to-head matchups. They had also picked up the exact same amount of points. PSG came in with goal differential advantage and were winning the tiebreaker. Except Benfica started scoring all these goals to the point where it started getting into a conversation about, well, actually, if Benfica can get the goal difference level, they're going to win on, I believe it's tiebreaker 6 away goals in the group. And so, they get 3 and then they get 4. And it doesn't even seem like Benfica is aware that they're actually only 2 goals away from topping this group. And they get another one. And instead of going to try and immediately get the ball and continue to keep playing, they celebrate. And then João Mario scores. And all of a sudden they have this 6-1 win. PSG do beat Juventus. They only do so 2-1. And so, sure enough, it ends level on goal difference. It goes to this other tiebreaker. And Benfica have topped this group. I have mentioned this team multiple times before. They are not just some feel-good story. They think about what they just did. In the head-to-head matchups and in the other 4 games in this group, they went toe-to-toe with PSG. It wasn't like they were scraping by and PSG were blowing these teams outright. They had to go all the way down the tiebreaker list because they matched PSG all the way through. They just scored 6 without even really trying. They are undefeated domestically with a 6-point lead in the Premier Liga. What else is there for them to prove? It would be one thing if they got the fortune of being in a really easy group where they were just better than everybody else, and so you can say, yeah, what happens if they go up against the top teams in this competition? They were in a group with Juventus and PSG, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge that was a admirable effort by a severely shorthanded Juventus today. I'm going to give them a hard time because of Andrea Agnelli and his arrogance, so when they show up and perform well, it's only fair I acknowledge that as well. Wasn't enough to win, but they were incredibly depleted and put up a very, very good fight against PSG. Back to Benfica, though. They just topped a group with PSG and Juventus in it. They have been consistently excellent domestically. And now they have the added benefit of being a group winner. They not only can advance in the round of 16, they need to be taken seriously as contenders. more of the dark horse kind than the, you know, favorites. But this is different than Villarreal kind of just finding a way and knocking out some teams. It was always hard to believe that Villarreal were going to be able to keep up with the best of the best. Juventus only carries so much weight. We're really good to get by Bayern, but there was always kind of just, at least for me, this feeling that it was going to run out at some point. They were too reliant on the defensive structure and kind of winning ugly, which is a formula for success in knockout tournaments. The problem is you're not going to be able to stop everybody. You got to be, it's the same conversation about having throughout the MLS playoffs. You got to be able to do both. You got to be able to defend and you got to be able to score. I know it sounds really simple, but sometimes that part doesn't get acknowledged. You got to be really good going forward too, or eventually you're going to have what happened against Liverpool, where you can play really well and it doesn't go your way. 30 minutes, the other team is brilliant. They got full world class attackers, and there goes your Champions League. This Benfica team can score goals with anybody. They are built. To me, they are well balanced enough that they can, they hung in there with PSG without letting them score a bunch of goals. They showed what they can do defensively, and they're also showing you what they can do in attack. They have it would be incredible if they actually went on and pulled this off. But the conversation needs to be the same thing as it would be for a Napoli, a Chelsea, a Tottenham, an AC Milan, right? These teams that you're not viewing as the favorites. They're not the best teams in the world. But it's, certainly they can knock somebody out. Do they have a chance to win this whole thing? That is the conversation Benfica needs to be involved in now. I wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about this because that is one of the most incredible things I have ever seen in the Champions League group stage. I have my criticisms of the Champions League group stage. This week was a perfect example of there just wasn't that much that was all that interesting because so much had already been decided. And then one of the important games I'm about to talk about was not interesting at all. But then you get something like this. I could not believe what I was watching. It is truly one of the most impressive things, unbelievable things I have seen in the Champions League. To me, this is right up there with any kind of upset you can think about. Not only what Benfica have done, but specifically the way that this played out, and they just kept scoring goals and got the ones they needed to actually end up atop this group. Absolutely unbelievable. This team is 100% legit. There are no holes to poke. The conversation is how far can they go in this tournament? Can they win the whole thing? Speaking of uninteresting games, AC Milan thumped Red Bull Salzburg 4-0 in a game Salzburg needed to win to jump AC Milan and get that final spot in Group E. It did not happen. It did not happen in large part because Salzburg were atrocious defensively. Yes, AC Milan were good. AC Milan's best players showed up and were incredibly dangerous. Some of those goals, though, you just can't give AC Milan that kind of time, those kind of chances in the box without clearing stuff. There was the one where Rafael Leao ran all the way around from one side of the penalty box to the other, and then I think the ball bounced at least once or twice in the box before, I'm pretty sure that was Giroud, actually put it into the back of the net. That stuff just can't happen. And I was willing to ride or die with the Salzburg team until the very end, really believing they had a chance to pull this off and get out of this group. And today was a turning point for me. It's not just that they lost, it's that they looked really bad doing it. Very disappointing. I really thought they had a chance, and that game was over, and it just continued to get worse. For AC Milan, first knockout stage appearance in the Champions League is 2013-14. And for Serie A as a whole, big time turning this thing around. It was going down a disastrous path, and then AC Milan stepped up, Inter Milan stepped up, and now you're talking about, 3 teams into the knockout stage. You're talking about AC Milan, and it's this progression, right? Inter's a year ahead, but win the league, get to the knockout stage, then try and go farther. AC Milan, win the league, get to the knockout stage, that's this season, and then they might be able to even speed this process up. But that was one of my criticisms of these Milan clubs is, and what is hurting Serie A as a whole, is the teams winning this league are then exiting early in the Champions League. Now we're finally starting to get to a point where they're at least getting into the knockout stage and giving themselves a chance. So congratulations, AC Milan. It's been a long time coming. They do what they need to do in impressive fashion to get out of Group E. And then the other really interesting group that turned out to be incredibly dramatic, Group D. In the end, it is Spurs and Eintracht Frankfurt who move on. At one point, it looked like neither the other 2 teams in this group were going to move on early. Spurs, another abysmal first half, both for their on-field performance and the fact that you lost Son Heung-min, who apparently Spurs have announced is going to undergo surgery to repair some kind of facial fracture, I think is the diagnosis. Doesn't seem to be a timeline on this, which is incredibly concerning if you're South Korea. Hopefully he's able to come back. I haven't seen anything talking about him missing the World Cup other than we just don't know for sure yet. So hopefully he gets a couple weeks here, even if he doesn't play for Spurs again, and is good to go for South Korea. And from a Spurs standpoint, before I get to the rest of this game, I have continued to not want to use the loss of these attackers as an excuse or a reason, because they spent too much money, because they should be way more ambitious going forward, whether Dejan Kulusevski or Charleston is on the field or not. But now you're getting to a point where you're talking about Harry Kane and Lucas Moura as basically the only healthy attacking players on this team. That is a really rough situation in which I'm much more willing to give you slack if Son ends up missing these next couple games and isn't back until after the World Cup. But at the end of the day, it was before Son got hurt, after Son got hurt in that first half. No matter who is on the field, it simply has to be better. I'm not going to give that whole spiel again. But they give up a goal and they just didn't really cause any kinds of problems for Marseille. Second half, different story. Showed up with attacking intent, rose to the occasion, got the goal they needed, and then Pierre-Emile Højbjerg adds the second at the very end, which unfortunately for Marseille sent them out of Europe entirely. Eintracht Frankfurt in the other game go behind, which is why it looked like there was a moment where Marseille and Sporting Lisbon were feeling really good, and then they both concede 2 unanswered goals, and it just kind of falls apart. So your end result, Spurs, Eintracht Frankfurt through, Sporting to the Europa League, which is a deserving reward for how good they were in this Champions League group. It would have been incredibly harsh for them to go from being so close to going through to not getting to participate in Europe at all. And it is Marseille who miss out a better Champions League performance, but the bar is, on the floor considering their recent past history. Ultimately, it's another massive disappointment. For whatever reason, this competition and this team it's not going well together. These past handful of appearances, I don't know what it is. To me, they were one of the big winners in Europe last season and were really headed down a positive path after some really dark moments there. And now it's, right there was a moment where they were hanging in there Champions League wise, giving them a chance. Right up there pushing PSG. And now it's just kind of all falling apart. We'll see if they can sort of pick the pieces up now that they don't have these European games to focus on. But I would have mentioned that too, just because they're always a fascinating storyline in the Champions League for me. And this group just could have gone any which number of ways, and ultimately it's Marseille who lose out, Spurs and Frankfurt who are your big winners because they get the job done. Before I get off the Champions League and start talking MLS Cup, I want to just go through quickly and kind of talk about the round of 16. We're not going to have the draw for a few days. I believe it's Monday. But your group winners, your quote-unquote seeded teams, Manchester City, Real Madrid, Bayern, Napoli, Benfica, Chelsea, Tottenham, Porto. And that is essentially my sort of power ranking. That was kind of what I went to do here real quickly, is team I want to play the least to team I would like to play the most if I'm on the other side of this. So if I'm an unseeded team, that runner-up in the group, Manchester City is the team I want to avoid the most for obvious reasons. As long as Erling Haaland is healthy, they're the most talented team in the world. And they typically do a pretty good job in at least the first couple rounds. It's a lot of semifinal losses and the occasional quarterfinal. It's not like they collapse in the round of 16. Number 2 for me is Real Madrid. Still not particularly inspired, but then again, I wasn't inspired last season. They still found a way to win the whole thing. Just them in this competition, I want no part of. It's as simple as that. And you're looking at these other teams, and I have some questions or concerns about them that if there's nobody else I feel really, really good about, give me the team that just finds a way in this competition all the time. Number 3, team I want to avoid is Napoli. I couldn't put them higher than 3rd because a team that doesn't have a track record of success in this competition, I can only be so scared of. That being said, I'm about as scared as Napoli if I'm a runners-up team than I can possibly be for a team that isn't used to going to the semifinals of this tournament. They are sensational. I don't really care that they lost to Liverpool in that final game. They were going to lose at some point. There's an argument it's even better that they did it in a way that doesn't hurt them at all. So they are the 3rd team I'd want to avoid. Next on that list is Bayern Munich. They are playing much, much better. They look like terrifying Bayern again. I need to be sure last season isn't going to repeat itself, and we can't find that out in the group stage as good as they were. But they're also just playing better than pretty much everybody else. So they're the 4th team on my power rankings. 5th, Benfica. Again, couldn't put them higher. Haven't seen them do it deep into this competition. There are more talented teams out there, even in the runners-up. But they're playing phenomenally well. So they're the 5th team I would want to avoid. 6th is Chelsea. I still believe in Graham Potter. I still believe in this team. You've got guys who have won this competition. It hasn't been great lately. So I feel, that's just out of the 8 options, this is the 3rd one I would choose, basically. Right? 6th in my power rankings if you're going from 1 to 8. So I don't feel terrible if I draw Chelsea. I just feel even better if I draw Tottenham or Porto. Tottenham because, again, yes, you got players with Champions League experience. You have a manager who hasn't been particularly good in this competition. You have plenty of players who haven't had a lot of Champions League success. And I am just fundamentally concerned about their ability to do what they need to do to make a deep run playing this way. It's going to hurt them less here, in my opinion, than in the Premier League in terms of trying to win the Premier League title. But I should be more scared of the attacking players they have, and I'm just not because of the way they play. And then 8th is Porto. Porto is a whole level behind Benfica. And you're talking about, Harry Kane. You're talking about Chelsea, Bayern, Napoli, Real Madrid, Man City are your other options. That was the easiest part for me. If I'm a runners-up team, I want Porto. Then power rankings for the runners-up, if I'm a team that won my group, the team I want to avoid is PSG. So I got PSG 1, obvious reasons. Somehow, some way, they didn't win that group. They are the expectation is to win this tournament. That can't really be said of any of these other runners-up. It's a huge deal that now they have to... Right, there's a 50% chance you're playing Manchester City, Real Madrid, Napoli, or Bayern. You can't play Benfica because they're in your group. So unless you draw Porto, you're playing a team that is at least on the same level, kind of, talent-wise. Maybe you can argue Chelsea and Tottenham are a step behind. But this is not what where PSG were supposed to be. But ultimately, they are head and shoulders the most dangerous, easily the most dangerous runners-up team. Second, I have AC Milan, starting to play really well, starting to show some consistency, which is something another Italian team that I have lower on this list has not really shown. You're defending Serie A champions. I'm not convinced they can do more than make the quarterfinals, but there are certainly teams I would rather see than AC Milan if I'm a group winner. Third, Liverpool. Partially out of my consistent loyalty to Jurgen Klopp and my unwavering belief he's going to figure things out eventually, somehow, some way. Partially because by the time we actually get to the round of 16, this Liverpool team is going to be much healthier. And we're also getting to a point where this is, qualifying for the Champions League next season is the goal. But you're not talking about a Premier League title run here. So all of a sudden you put that little bit of added emphasis on the Champions League. These are guys who know how to win this competition, consistently deliver. So they are, in spite of everything, they're the third team I would want to avoid, sort of third on my runners-up power rankings. Fourth is Borussia Dortmund. I'm still a believer in this Dortmund team. I've been a little bit disappointed so far. But Jude Bellingham is absolutely loving this competition. And there are four, and then there are four for me. There's kind of this clear dividing point at the halfway line. And Dortmund fall just on the upper side of that. And then we get to the bottom one. So fifth for me, Inter Milan. You can argue they're better, more talented, whatever, than Borussia Dortmund. I need to see Inter Milan actually beat some really good teams. Because it's been Barcelona and that's it. And Barcelona have their own shortcomings. They have not been anywhere near as consistent enough for me to be really scared of them if I'm, Bayern. Well, I'm not going to play Bayern. But if I'm Real Madrid or Chelsea or Tottenham or somebody. Then sixth, Red Bull Leipzig. Couldn't put them ahead of Inter just because Inter have proven a lot more. And at any point, this could go back into disaster mode for Leipzig. But right now, Marco Rose has got this thing going. Still not convinced about how dangerous they really can be, which is why they're sixth out of these 8 teams for me. But certainly much more interesting conversation if you draw Leipzig than a month ago. Seventh, Eintracht Frankfurt. I like Leipzig better, not by all that much. There's just something about, you got here by winning the Europa League last season and you weren't spectacular domestically. They've been good so far. I won't be scared if I draw them. And then eighth is Club Brugge. You get the benefit of a favorable group. Atletico Madrid doesn't show up. And you still have some not so convincing performances and some convincing ones. Just everybody else is a step above. So if that's the team you're trying to draw. If you are anybody in that winners, the teams at the top of the group, you're trying to get Club Brugge in my mind. And it's also interesting because the teams I have at the bottom of this for both sections here came from the same group, which is a commentary on Atletico Madrid and how disappointing and embarrassing that was. But B, it makes it interesting because obviously they can't play each other. So I'll run through this one more time, my sort of power rankings from the winners: Manchester City, Real Madrid, Napoli, Bayern Munich, Benfica, Chelsea, Tottenham, Porto. And from the runners up, PSG, AC Milan, Liverpool, Borussia Dortmund, Inter Milan, Red Bull Leipzig, Eintracht Frankfurt, and Club Brugge.